Jonathan here from Grow Gothenburg, and I'm now at Ridgedale Permaculture. Today we'll share a really nice video with an interview with Richard Perkins. So that's coming up on the Grow vlog.
Hey Jonathan.
Hi Richard, really nice to be here. And
Yeah.
I really enjoy the course we've had now.
Yeah, it's been awesome though.
Yeah, getting like a really good overview of your farm, and then like getting in depth into how Curtis Stone's farm is working.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Yeah, and I'm actually really inspired by getting this deep, like this broad overview of the how many enterprises is it you're running here?
It's quite a few. It's focused on pastured layers, broilers, market gardens, but then we have turkeys, forest raised pigs, and we're starting to breed beef cows onto our cows, as well as agroforestry, but these are all things coming down the line. So starting with 3 main primary enterprises and diversifying out.
Yeah, so can you tell us very shortly the 3 enterprises and why you're focusing on them?
Sure. So we wanted to really design a perennial long-term system which is tree and berry bush based and pasture based. But these things are not paying back in any quick manner, so we've chosen enterprises specifically that are low-cost startup and pay back quickly and effectively. And they're all scalable and replicable on rented land on much bigger scales, and that's due in part to our educational focus here to really expose people to a whole array of options and get them in touch with it to feel like what will suit me and what, could I scale up or see myself doing. So pastured layers are really fantastic for a small farm. Poultry in general are really great for a small farm because of the amount of animals you can have in a small space, which means you're able to drive a viable economy. Whereas larger livestock, sheep, cows, etc., you can't really do that profitably on a small scale. And so we've been working with mobile eggmobiles and currently have 1,200 hens producing about 30 tons of eggs for sale within a 50-kilometre radius. And same sort of thing with our pasture broilers, that's meat bird production. And we have a small slaughtery on farm that we are able to both maintain the quality of the product we deliver to the customer, but also take the revenue out rather than some middleman getting it, as it were. And then market gardens, we're operating on 1,500 square meters, which can produce about 100 CSA shares, but we don't sell in that way anymore. We're moving towards RICO, which is a consumer it's a Facebook group, consumer farmer interactions, where we're selling direct. It's like a farmer's market that's all pre-sold, you could say. And so these enterprises really integrate together. The waste products from winter bedding from our livestock can go into our market garden.
And it's a totally no-dig, but
it's a no-dig market garden. So we're working by we're sitting in the garden now, and we're just placing large amounts of compost straight on the ground. This was actually, it's our neighbour's land that we're growing on predominantly, and this was all football field a couple of years ago. So we're building beds straight onto pasture, essentially.
So you're also essentially growing on borrowed land, actually, here.
Yeah, we're not even paying rent, it's just from goodwill from our neighbour. And this little strip that goes behind us, there's forestry behind us too. I think at one point it would have belonged to our farm. It looks from the topographic map that this was a sectioned off piece of land. And the neighbour's just using it for forestry, so this little 1,000 square metre patch that we're borrowing is something they've never done anything with other than cut the grass. So to have us grow vegetables here just saves them any work at all. So it's really nice. And they're elderly and they have no intention of, changing our agreement, as it were, as long as we're respectful. We're not allowed to plant trees or anything here, but they've been happy that we garden it, and they come by regularly and they're super happy about it.
Yeah, cool. So if you, we have a lot of people in our community who wants to start getting into farming, and often they live in the city. They don't have the economy to buy land.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to see how you can start off on rented land or leased land.
Yeah.
And I think your approach here with the market garden is really interesting to what you can do in a small scale, but also the layers and the broilers if you have access to a little bit bigger land.
Yeah, so a big part of what we do is matching people, like enterprises, to the size and skill base that people have. So a lot of people have dreams that need narrowing down to fit the sort of land base they have access to. You know, if you have a couple of thousand square meters in the city, that's enough to drive a really good economy, market gardening, for example. But you can't run a layer flock on something like that. So you have all these options with different enterprise choices. If you have a bit more land, things like pastured birds works really well, and it's a lot less hours needed. You just need more space, and the day-to-day work looks different. A market garden here is pretty much 7-8 months full-time hard work, and then it shuts down in the winter, and there's no light here in the winter to grow over the winter, so we just shut the enterprise down for 4 months. Whereas something like the layers, it's 3 times less work to drive the same revenue, but it's 7 days a week year round. So these are all things to consider to really, you know, wrap your head around what do I want my working day to look like. And, you know, there's enterprises suitable for any size of land, part-time to full-time, depends what people want to do. But all of the enterprises here could be run on rented land, and they're all based on mobile infrastructure. Except for the gardens, which are obviously you're building soil the whole time, you want that in a permanent place, but it can still be on leased or borrowed land. So.
Yeah. And I'm really interested also in seeing the whole design you have applied here in terms of permaculture design and keyline design in specific. And it's really interesting to see how you combine keyline design with holistic management to kind of also, in a very short amount of time, increase the level of topsoil and organic matter in the soil. And essentially you're capturing carbon and increasing fertility in the soil for so many benefits. So I'm really interested in seeing how can this be done in a bigger scale, or like how can just more people take this on. And is it something you think we could apply to cities? For instance, we're working a lot in Gothenburg, which is a quite big Swedish city.
Yeah.
Do you think one could apply it?
To some degree. I mean, obviously in any green spaces, and typically our cities are full of huge amounts of green spaces that aren't utilized very effectively, and often managed with huge amounts of chemicals to deal with weeds of lawns in parks. And it's amazing, like in a big city like New York or London, there's, you know, thousands of acres of unused land that could be supplying the food supply within the city, and it's something you don't have to look far back into history to see. I mean, London grew 60% of its food within the city boundary during the Second World War, and we've seen the same in Havana, Cuba recently, and there's definitely scope for bringing food production back into the city. And you were talking about capturing carbon. Essentially, all of these things are created by mimicking how nature does it. How does nature run big herds of herbivores? And nature keeps animals moving, and then the animals have a big impact on the ground that drives forward succession and the building of soil. And in nature, you also find birds following herbivores through nature. So we do that with cows and chickens as a proxy for the ancient oryx or whatever used to be roaming around here in Europe, and that's the best we can do. So we're trying to mimic natural patterns and flows, and we can do that with tree systems or animal systems, or even in our vegetable garden by building soil, by putting organic matter on the surface rather than tilling, which is just how nature does it too. So you can apply those principles anywhere. It's obviously going to be limited in scope in terms of land access in the city, but the same principles apply.
Yeah. So if you have a piece of land and you want to start a no-dig garden, what is your biggest recommendation? What should you think about?
I think the trick with no-dig is to have enough organic matter to put down. So here at our farm we have all of our beds are 10 meters long, and 75 centimeters wide, and that's critical. The width of these beds is directly linked to the types of tools that have been created to make market gardening a lot more efficient. So I always recommend people make beds 75 centimeters wide. The length is not so critical, but it's more important they're all the same. And so in our case, we have a fairly small parcels around the farm. We've chosen 10 meters, and we have 200 of these beds. And we've made beds in different ways. The first beds we made over on the other side of the farm. There's some photos online from 4.5 years ago when we were making them. We've just literally put down 15 centimeters of rotten manure straight on the lawn. And then we put cardboard down under the pathways and wood chip on top of that to blanket out weeds. And you'll still get the odd tenacious weeds coming through. I mean, we're building on pastures, so things like buttercup and couch grass and horsetail, they're quite hard to get rid of. So you just stay on top of them and weaken them. But having enough organic material has been the limiting factor for most people. If you just put a little bit of organic matter on pasture, you're just going to make pasture grow better. So it's really about smothering the ground as deep as you can. It's better to start with less beds and do it really intensively than start too big and go shallow everywhere, because you'll spend your whole time just managing weeds. And we get weeds here, but it's really not as bad as it would be if we had a bare ground tillage-based vegetable production. So putting enough resources down in the beginning is what you need, and getting good balanced compost. So we actually have been purchasing compost in from a company here called Rulander, and it's essentially organic cow, chicken manure and the bedding from the winter. And it's a very balanced, well-made compost, and it's worked out because of the volume. So on one of these 10 by 75 centimeter beds, we're putting down 400 litres of compost initially, and I'd say that's a minimum. I would have put double on if I could have afforded it. Now I bought all that in because it's cheaper than my time to make that much compost. But now we're in a position where the beds are established. We don't need to add so much. We'll maybe add an inch or so each year. And that we can now do on farm with we essentially have cow manure, chicken manure ourselves all winter. So we've actually been using peat moss or torf here as the bedding material for a deep litter system over the winter, and then that's composted down and can be put on the beds at the end of each year to start for the next year. So we're becoming closed loop here, but I do recommend buying in good compost, because you're investing in your soil and it's the basis of your crop production. So unless you're extremely good at making compost, it can be a better idea to leave that to an expert somewhere else and put your time into perfecting growing vegetables. Yeah.
And you don't really need a lot of space. You have 1,500 square meters approximately, and you're getting...
Well, let's say 2,500, and that would include all the spaces around the beds and pathways, etc. So it's 1,500 square meters of bed space, made up of 200 of these beds. So you need it to factor in about 30% of the space for pathways and walkways and things like that.
Yeah. Cool. And if you want to extend the season as you have been doing here, you have caterpillar tunnels, you have low tunnels, and you even have the big poly high tunnels for the chickens in the winter, which are working multifunctionally to also grow tomatoes. So it's really interesting when you stack these enterprises, you get a lot of benefits.
Well, and you need to utilize, so a big polytunnel or greenhouse is an expensive space relatively, so you need to be using that year round. In this climate, at this latitude, we can't grow through the winter because of the lack of sunlight. So it becomes a perfect vehicle to act as animal shelter with natural light, which is obviously a limiting factor here. And so we turn out about 40,000 euros of eggs in the winter out of the tunnel, which is then growing intensive tomatoes all summer. But yeah, season extension here is vital. It's 3 months without frost. It's a very short season, and it can vary up to a month each way each year. So we use primarily row covers, so fleece row covers. 40 grams a square meter is ideal here, and they're on all the beds in early spring and in autumn as well. So everything's under little row covers. We're using 4mm wire hoops over the beds, and that keeps the fleece up, and that can moderate the temperature by 4 or 5 degrees. And then caterpillar tunnels you see behind us, this is a product that we are developing with a UK manufacturer. They're invented by a farmer's friend in America, and we've been trying to get them built here so that people don't need to ship things like tunnels across the world. It seems a little bit obsessive. So we're hoping to have them available on the EU market sometime this year. I was hoping they'd already be available, but not yet.
Yeah.
But these are great. These are super low cost. They're about a quarter of the price of a big fixed polytunnel. And these tunnels can be moved very quickly by a couple of people. They're just held onto metal posts in the ground, so you can move the whole tunnel each year as you rotate your crops. So they're super low cost and really functional way to extend the season.
Thank you for all the inspiration. So
Yeah,
any final
so
words for people who want to get started?
Yeah, I just really encourage you to go check out places and go, get started. There's nothing like getting started. That's when the learning really begins, and it can be overwhelming for people to make that step, but nothing really happens till you get started. So I encourage you to come by. We have open days sometime in August and throughout the year, and come and see different places and connect with other people. And I'd love to come and make videos with some of you in Gothenburg and around other urban environments doing this kind of stuff. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming. It's been awesome.
Yeah, and do check out Richard Perkins' awesome YouTube channel. You find a lot of really interesting content there as well.
Yeah, and Curtis, who is here, check his channel too, because he's working in an urban environment, so it's very appropriate to any of you trying to grow vegetables there. So.
Cool. Yeah, and if you don't have land, check out Grow Gothenburg, growgbg.com, and you'll be able to find land or share land.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So if you want to see more stuff like this, please subscribe, and see you soon.